Let's talk now to the Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at the University of Oxford, Sunetra Gupta. Welcome to the show, Professor. I'm looking at the 7-day moving average of new cases. It's now 6,220. A week ago, it was 4,501. So it's not doubling, it's rising by under 40%. In Spain and France, daily cases higher than they are in Britain, but they're flattening at around 12,000. There was no movement in France in the past week on daily cases, and in Spain there was a slight drop. I would suggest to you, but you know so much more than I do than this, that it's inconceivable that we will get to 50,000 cases a day, as Professor Whitty has said, within 2 weeks. Inconceivable. Am I wrong?
I would tend to agree with you. I mean, what we have here are a set of scenarios, and what we ought to be thinking about is what is probable, what's possible, what's unlikely. And the only way we can do that is by understanding the logic behind these projections, or whatever they're called, not predictions apparently. So, you know, you look at that, someone stands up and says it's doubling, and if it doubles in this way, then, you know, just do the math, and you'll get to these extraordinary numbers. And, you know, if you get stuck in the, oh yeah, true, if you do the math, it does go that way, then you miss out on that vital component, which is, why would it do that in the first place? And so if you start to think about why would it do that, then you realize that that sort of thinking, you know, if there is any logic to it at all, it applies to an epidemic that's just taking off, where everyone's susceptible and ready, available for infection. And as far as we know, that is not the case in many of these countries, certainly not in the UK. So that's the first thing to note. Now, we don't know exactly how many people are at the moment immune or not available for infection, because we thought we'd be able to find this out by doing these antibody tests, but as it turns out, the situation is a bit more complicated than that. So the seropositivity, in other words, how many people have antibodies, is not a very good indication of how many people are immune. So given that, and given the extraordinary or quite wide heterogeneity in numbers who have antibodies, or proportions who have antibodies, it's quite difficult to make firm predictions about where we're going. But at the moment, what we're seeing is very much in line with what happens to any other infection like the COVID around this time of the year. In other words, everything goes up, flu goes up, pneumococcal pneumonia goes up. There are 1,000 people a week dying of flu and pneumonia at the moment. So the context is very important, as is an understanding, a very basic understanding of the dynamics of these infections.
Well, you mentioned that number dying of flu. The 7-day moving average for COVID deaths is 40 at the moment, which is a lot less. But you see, to someone like me who can do the arithmetic, but has no medical expertise whatsoever, I would come to the conclusion that we were sort of false prospectus. Intentionally, these figures were put to us, with the scientists being complicit and the politicians softening up the ground for new lockdown measures. What would be wrong with that conclusion?
Well, it's not for me to say what the intention of the scientists or the politicians, what they are. All I can say is that I think they should think very, very carefully about the costs of lockdown. And it's not just, I think we should get away from just talking about the economy, because people tend to separate the economy from the impact on lives. So the economy is not just this sort of external thing that we have to attend to, and which we can sort of ignore and continue down this kind of narrow track of trying to keep COVID under control. What happens as we try to do that to other public health issues and the economy, insofar as that affects the lives And we're talking about life and death. We're talking, particularly if we start to broaden our perspective from outside the UK to the world, which is, I think, as international citizens we should do, we're talking about people dying of hunger. So the economy is not sort of this external thing that we don't need to worry about. It's about lives against lives. And I think that's something that's completely, or it's not obvious in the conversations around the control of this virus that have been occurring since the very beginning.
The policy response when the pandemic started to take off was lockdown. And many people thought at the time, look, we don't really know what's going to happen. It's a mystery. It's uncharted territory. It's probably the right thing to do. That was the public opinion. But here we are now, 6 months in September, and the policy response to rising cases is still various varieties of lockdown. Is that the right policy response?
I don't think so. I think lockdown simply delays things. It doesn't solve the problem at all. It just delays it. And as you say, right, in March, maybe, you could make the case that we needed to buy some time. So, let's go into lockdown. We can afford maybe a month of lockdown. Why not do that? Maybe, a case could be made for that. Although personally, I was worried right at the outset about the effects of lockdown. But, I think one could make a case for it, particularly given the sort of worst case scenario that the Imperial College model had presented. But it is very clear you don't have to have a very sophisticated understanding of the dynamics of this disease to appreciate that locking things down can only delay its course. So, and if it were possible to do that without any other costs, then sure, carry on locking down. But it's patently obvious that you cannot do that, that there are profound costs, and these costs are just mounting. So,
sorry, Professor.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
What did you make of Kate pointing that public opinion was perhaps moving in a direction that maybe we now need just to learn to live with this? Not that it means everything back to normal or anything like that, but that we've got to accept it's going to be around for some time. And rather than lockdowns or extreme measures, we should learn to live with it. Would that be a sensible response?
I think that's a very sensible response, and that's what should have been made available as an option or as the most likely course. Again, right from the outset, because that is what was likely to happen with a virus of this ilk. So what's most likely to happen and desirable is that it settles down to what we call an endemic equilibrium, such as we enjoy with influenza, with pneumococcal, the bugs that cause pneumonia, and a variety of other pathogens. We live at an endemic equilibrium with them and live lives normally and accept the deaths that they cause, because that's what society is about. It's about optimizing on this really quite complex landscape of risks and weighing the costs and benefits to arrive at a solution that is the best thing for everybody.
When you put these points to the Prime Minister, what did he say?
Nothing. But then he has responded since then.
No, clearly he didn't listen to you, did he?
He has since then responded in terms that suggest he doesn't agree with what we propose as a strategy, which is that we allow the virus to reach that endemic equilibrium, but meanwhile, try and hasten that moment where it becomes the same as flu, which may have already happened, we don't know, but to try and get there, the best thing to do is to allow it to circulate and protect the vulnerable people. And then once it reaches that endemic equilibrium, life can return to normal. It doesn't have to go to some new normal. We can go back to the old normal. Maybe we can learn a few things from the experiment, but